This program is coming to you via Relay 2 satellite, a spacecraft orbiting the Earth at a speed of over 17,000 miles per hour.
Exertus.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Join us on another exciting adventure of Exertus.
Hello, can you hear me okay? Hi.
How's it going?
It's great. Yeah, my name is Cynthia Sue Larson, and I run a website, RealityShifters.com, which I've been publishing a monthly newsletter through that website for more than 20 years right now. I'm just getting to know a little bit about your group, so it's new to me what you've been working on, but I'm fascinated by the concept. It seems like I'm actually quite impressed with your scope and your visionary viewpoint that it could be possible for something to rise up out of the past, if I understand correctly, that people had it's like it's been there all the time, yet nobody knew about it. And that's exactly the kind of thing we can expect to see based on the sorts of reality shifts I've already observed and what we're learning even this year in quantum physics. So I think you guys are right on the cutting edge, leading the way in terms of what people are really doing to prove out some hypothetical theories that otherwise sound like science fiction.
Right.
Yes.
So do you want to explain, I guess, a bit about what you've been doing? Where did you start out, and how did you get here?
Right. Those are good questions. Well, I have to back up a little before the 20 years, but the 20 years I've been focused entirely on what's now known widely as Mandela effect. But I think there are better terms than that. I've been calling it reality shifts, quantum jumps. But for me, it's a very large phenomenon, and it's part of the intrinsic nature of humans that we're capable of witnessing changes in what looks like material reality based on our thoughts and feelings. We can absolutely, and we often do, witness the past changing. And I don't think that's been fully appreciated or understood. And we can do this on a subjective level, so that you can have some people that observe certain things changing and others don't, for example, because objective reality, there are a lot of assumptions science has made that are completely wrong. And that's what I've been tracking for the last 20 years, very specifically. But what I was trying to say is before that, I'm actually what's now called born aware. So it means that when I was a small child, I already knew things that you shouldn't be able to know, and reality moves differently for me than it does for most people. Although at the same time, I am aware that all of us can experience these things, this phenomena of reality shifting. And it can, in fact, I think we're reaching a point on the planet that we need it. And so I'm so excited to be talking with members of a group like yours, because I get the feeling intuitively that you're part of the vanguard moving forward, the visionaries that are able to do something positive with this quantum jumping reality shifting that all of us are able to do. But sometimes their imagination can be a limiting factor. And it's been a very exciting field for me to be able to witness some of the scientific discoveries that have happened this year in particular. Remarkable discoveries have been happening, showing that reality is not one objective thing that everybody agrees to and it never changes. Instead, we're getting the first absolute proof in a laboratory setting by researchers in Europe, and some of them were in Austria and some were working out of Canada, and observing that you can have two observers looking at the same exact thing at the same time, have two different observations. And that's what I have been observing for 20 years with lots of other people, witnessing things literally changing that have always been in this new way, new to us because we remember it differently, and just figuring out what's going on with that. So I've got a degree in physics from UC Berkeley, and my fascination with physics while I was studying it was about quantum physics. So there's definitely a lot of importance to quantum physics in this field.
That's interesting that you also mentioned kind of the narratives that are playing out, because I've personally made a keen observation having a deep discussion with one of our other members, Miles, who I'm sure you're maybe a little familiar with, and kind of the parables that have been playing out in people's lives and how these almost mythical creatures or beings are kind of just appearing in certain people or manifested in their actions almost.
Yes. So I don't know which animals you're talking about at the moment, but that is an area that I'm really fascinated by, actually, especially mythical animals. Yes. There's a lot that I put in the body of my work more publicly, and some things such as the mythical animal part. I do mention it, like in my book, Reality Shifts, I talk about going in a bookstore and following a smell, which was like lavender. And there was only one gentleman in the bookstore at the time, so I followed him around, but he was not the source of the scent. It was actually kind of this etheric scent that was a trail in the bookstore. It got stronger when I went to a certain book. When I removed the book, it was a book about unicorns. And I opened the page, just to some random page, and the very first thing I read, there was a picture of a unicorn with lavender, which is the scent I had been smelling. And it said lavender is the unicorn's favorite fragrance. So that was quite remarkable.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's interesting how it plays out too.
Yes.
So what kind of cryptozoology, like, you're interested in unicorns, and how did it start that you were interested in, like, kind of because you're interested in physics and concrete science, you're also toying by, like, having interest in all these other things. How'd that happen?
Well, I think most of us, when we're children, we're interested in what you call cryptozoology. For me personally, I went through a Kundalini awakening, and that was where I met quite a few mythical creatures that were quite real to me. They were like dragons and so forth. Yeah, so the dragons came in when I had this Kundalini awakening, because it was a very sacred experience for me to feel that I just had all this energy running through my body. This happened in 1994, a number of years before I started my website, and this was quite meaningful for me to encounter these creatures that were able to basically convey information that I otherwise didn't really have direct knowledge of. It seemed like I was communing with these ninth dimensional dragons that were creators in the universe. That's the only way to put it. It might sound kind of crazy, but there were 3 of them, and they were very real to me, and had a very profound impact on me at that time that I was going through a Kundalini awakening. But the rest of the things I'm talking about, I realize they sound pretty crazy as it is, so I don't tend to emphasize the dragon bit too much.
Well, you're among your peers here, and so it's something that we've gotten to the point where not only do we go back in history and look at a lot of things from a different perspective, but a lot of our understandings and our beliefs we've had to kind of reflect on multiple times and reinterpret. So stuff of that nature is kind of par for the course for us, because we've kind of normalized what is not considered to be the standard normalization of society.
We're finding so much example of actual dragon, remains, and the thing that's funny is we're finding more evidence of that than we're finding of supposedly actual dinosaurs, for instance. And it's funny how much more you'd find of cryptozoology evidence of Sasquatch or of dragons or of giant titans, right? Like even finding giant sea urchins or giant things that came out of the seas at some point and have been fossilized, or things that look like they could be even large, sophisticated. Like we have a friend, one of the members is Mike Stellium7. He's found what seems to be pretty good evidence of giant mastodons or elephants that are, you know, mountain sized. In general, I think we're getting to a point more and more is being there's kind of a reveal that's happening. As you called it, born aware. I mean, I kind of feel it's a new term for me. I like it. I kind of feel like that describes or diagnose. Well, so okay, so to ask some more questions about what you consider physics and what do you consider metaphysics, and what is it led you into physics to begin with in school, or how that happened?
Right. Well, originally, when I was quite young, I wanted to know the true nature of reality. So that led me to explore. My father said, "Oh, good, that sounds like science," and he really loved math. He loved science. So my sister and I both pursued in our studies sciences, and I went into physics because it seemed like that was at the core of the nature of reality. But to me, quantum physics really gets to it gets to this transformative way of thinking that we need to adapt, and we're going to be forced into it with the quantum technologies that are coming, the quantum computing. There's no more pretending that there's only one objective reality that we can press down on everyone and force them to agree with it. Instead, what's happening this year, 2019, so excited about it, is that we're getting literal, like I mentioned earlier, this proof from laboratory settings that there is no one consensus reality at all. And that just clobbers. That's one of many things that quantum physics destroys with this old paradigm of just material realism and a bunch of other things. So for me personally, the physics appeal, it's constant, it's steady, it's ongoing. Because when you look at quantum physics, you recognize that there's this entanglement between all of us who are connected. You recognize that we work together in a collaborative fashion, that there's basically coherence is a real thing. So when someone observes something, and it depends on the level of observation. So this has to do with who we actually are. I think quantum physics requires us, it forces us to take a look at that. And I think that's what I love when I hear about what your group is doing, because you're not assuming that what you've heard before is always the truth. Instead, you're looking at some of the outlying data that was thrown out by people that may have been afraid to mention it, and you're exploring it further. And I think that that kind of exploration does, when we see how the past can change, then we recognize that we may not be stuck no matter what's happening in our current present. And that's why I see it as such a hopeful thing and very meaningful and quite profound that you're working in these areas.
Well, one of the interesting things also that we're finding too, and Andreas, correct me if I'm wrong on this or incorrect, because you're a little more in depth on this, but we've also noticed, like, as we dig deeper into the past, and I've also mentioned this before, that we're starting to find a relation to things in the future. It's almost like they're manifesting one and the same. And so that at the same time we're discovering this stuff in the past, it's almost bringing it into reality, into the present. And so it's this interesting dynamic that has been playing out, especially with a lot of the observation with Tartarian elements or Scythian, or of these ancient empires. And it started to kind of like complete this full circle, like we're going back into our past, but returning into the future as well.
I mean, you hit kind of the whole idea is on all of it. You've hit on the head. Tartaria and Tartarus, and the idea of the Tartessus and Hades being described as Tartaria or the Tartarus. It's the idea that they're at both ends of the meta. And when I was younger and I first would talk about meta when I went to South America and Spain, I tried to explain meta because meta is becoming such a cool word to say, at least, in California. And it was like, meta, bro, it's so meta, but like, how do you say that, que meta? You can't say que meta, like, because meta means that like the ending you'll have of a freeway Batman us would have said meta, like end, like you can't go beyond this. And so everyone's like, what do you mean? Like the ending? Or it's like, no. Like the beginning, like the outside. Yeah, the outside of the beginning and the ending, and so it's, but meta can't be that word always, even if we push it in the media. It has to be like a little bit of the Tartessus, the Tartar. And also, yeah, the Scythian thing is interesting because we're looking at these places being moved around and having to shift variables. So you're looking at a place and you're like, this isn't the place, it used to be. And maybe the whole idea of the place is superimposed on top of another, like Poland, which was physically moved from one place to another place to be closer to Russia. It's like, I mean, evidence for it everywhere. Why just it happened more than that?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I love the way you're getting at the idea of the meta, because that's the key to when I'm talking about the quantum physics requires that we ask ourselves, who are we? We have this assumption that we think we know who we are, that we're in this, meat suit, that our body is the end and the beginning in all of us. And actually, those of us who meditate recognize, or those of us who connect with the animals like dragons, unicorns, we're pretty much aware that our consciousness can be expanded beyond our body. And that is the definition of meta. It's just taking another step. And each time we do that, you get a little bit more free play and degrees of freedom in the sorts of realities you can step back into. So it's remarkable, just from an experiential point of view with reality shifts and noticing history change in my life, and also on a global scale, as we're noticing with the relatively recent term for Mandela effect, which is happening around the world, where people agree that geography is changing. I think that we're getting to a point where even some of our classically trained scientists are going to have to agree that anytime there's any sort of what do you call it? A jump in evolution. So an evolutionary jump, those pretty much are not going up a smooth continuum, but instead really are like quantum jumps. And even bigger than that, the sorts of things you're noticing, where you're going back, digging down through time and finding evidence of what looks like future civilizations. This also meshes perfectly with some indigenous wisdom, such as the Hopi, who talk about ideas. They've got the word Tunatya and Tunatyava, which mean come true, being hoped for. And they tell stories about the world having come to an end many times before, that we're in the fifth world and there will be seven. And each time that there's this transitional period, we are able to see beings in the clouds and stars, the clouds by day, the stars by night. And then sometimes what they call ant people come, and future people, ETs, whatever, provide rafts and help us move to the next world. But what it sounds like from this viewpoint we have in 2019, recognizing, look what we're finding. Let's not hide our crypto, archaeology and the discoveries that you guys are making. Let's not pretend this isn't happening. Let's take a look at what we really are finding and some new ideas from that. So I think, but it all comes back again to who are we, and this idea of meta and the ability to step back, recognize that we too can traverse time, that space and time can move together. And just because we're digging down through layers, we might be finding things that look very futuristic to us. That also maps in with what the Hopi talk about, that in the past there had been flying, it sounds like spacecraft were flying around. So, and this is not just the Hopi, this is indigenous wisdom around the world. It's just not usually spoken of. And in the West, we don't tend to give it much credence, but with what you guys are doing, I think it's perfectly appropriate to talk about it.
Oh yeah, and,
sorry, you
Victor
first.
Victor has actually done a lot of work. One of the members related, and one of the things he discovered was some of the stuff related to your ants that you were just referencing too. And so we've found evidence of that.
Excellent.
So we've been finding like all these points of like narratives or parables that were played out. We're starting to find more and more, not only evidence of it, but manifesting of it coming into reality. But that's, yeah, it's definitely a beautiful thing. Sorry, Mike, you were saying something?
Oh, all the things we've been finding on Earth, on just what Google presents us as Earth is remarkable. I showed a picture earlier by sharing my screen of the Pacific Ocean. Where is it? Here is it. This is a really big dragon, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Right here between Hawaii and Wake Island.
Yes, you're correct. These are the dragons I know. Yes.
Excellent.
Nice.
Yeah, they're reality creators.
Here's another one. And it's attacking a really big fish.
Oh yeah.
Let me switch this overlay off. Yeah, on here.
Yes.
The whole mountain range. But there's a dragon, and we haven't even begun to scratch the surface.
Mm.
We've got this is by Mike Stellium, one of our other members. Let me see if I can find it in one go. The Mont Go. Where is it? Here. This is a really big elephant. You need to open
Oh yeah.
the elephant of Mont Go. And we have a member that's done a lot of actual on-the-ground research into what makes this an elephant.
I'm blown away. Also, Cynthia, you were talking about the five. This is the fifth stage of the Hopi's belief of the fifth world, the fifth extinction. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. This is and we're coming to the end of this and moving on to the next level. Yes.
I mean, that's completely, they taught me in school, science. They said that this is the fifth. Now we're headed into the sixth great major extinction, and I was wondered why they were so sure that it happened in those there were five of them that had happened before, specifically Armageddon's.
Right. So you asked earlier a question about science and the difference between science and metascience, or physics and metaphysics. Here's a good example of it. So the die-offs, I studied that too. I did a middle school science report on it because I looked at coral reef histories and looked at those die-offs, and they're quite obvious when you look at what happened with the oceans and the coral reef animals. And I think that is quite remarkable that this scientific proof that we have looking at coral reefs dovetails exactly with what the indigenous wisdom and the stories, the narratives they tell, the difference being that they talk about at each end of the world, animals would come back to life that had never been alive before. They talk about, these ant people that would come and help the humans. They talk about a lot of other things happening, at the time of these transitional periods.
Wow, ant people? What about the ant people? I'm curious.
Did you ever see Victor's work on that when he posted a bunch of stuff, Andreas?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard so much about ant people from also, I have a friend who's Vince Cocapelli. His mouth is actually the staff of an insect, and not a flute, but an actually like a mosquito or something, or an ant with I forget the name of this. I'm sorry, but so it's interesting.
Like mandible, is that it?
Mandible, absolutely. So what if it was Cocapelli's mandible, he calls it? And so it was interesting that you said that, because I've always thought about Lemuria, the Mu, being, a place that was maybe correlated with some rescue by these giant ant people. I mean, I feel like I've heard that somewhere, but not from the Hopi. That's just fascinating.
Yeah. I wrote an article about it, so send me an email. My email is cynthia@realityshifters.com, and I'll send you the article I wrote for Parabola magazine, which is the stories. Yeah, so cynthia@realityshifters.com, and I'll just give you that article because you can Yeah, it's pretty cool.
By the way, Cynthia, we read that article. It's fantastic. It really is. And the way you talk about the way language is either noun based or verb based, and I've seen that when I've read a lot of Native American literature, especially when they were taught by the white man during the early days. They couldn't understand should, could, things like
Right.
that. Yeah, so it was really enlightening. Thank you for the article, and nice to meet you.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I love what you guys are doing. So it gives me goosebumps.
I mean, I feel the same way. I'm so grateful to have you and learning about things like, they're filling in all the blanks. And I'd love to know more about the Native American things. And also, gosh, you went over so many things for a second ago. It's hard to catch all of them, but like in terms of giants, I guess we'll go there for a second because you were looking at the giants. What do you think about large species of life, and what were they like, and what happened?
Oh gosh, I don't know. That's not whoa, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I got down.
My most of my interactions with what I'd call like large dragons are much more the energetics. When I talked about meta and who are we and that idea of self, there are times that I feel like I am 3 of these large 9-dimensional dragons, and that is who I am. I know that may sound like, what? Like, how can you say that? But it feels like it's a good fit for who I am. So for me, the animals on Earth, I don't know much about that, but I do understand that we often see in physical reality that which we first experience on an energetic level. And the dragons I'm quite familiar with. I also am familiar with many of the nature spirits. It's called divas, which are sometimes resident inside mountains or in weather formations. So I can see those and talk to those. So when I talked about being born aware, for me in particular, it's an awareness of recognizing intelligent entities that may not be in a physical form, but nevertheless I can sense their presence. I can recognize their identity, understand their motive, their intent, and communicate with them. So that's something I do. If a volcano's erupting or there's an earthquake imminent, I can talk to the divas and quite often change things that are more favorable for humanity. So those are my experiences. And I haven't looked into the large animals walking on the physical Earth, but I believe that they would be here because they seem to me to be a good match for a lot of what I've witnessed energetically.
Do you think that there's an association between the different Earths, like in terms of time, realms of, like the different stages of life that are connected to each other? Like maybe they're simultaneous or something in some sense connected?
Good question. I think just the fact that we've seen these mass die-offs that are happening, if you look at the coral reefs and you use the traditional science, and it's quite obvious. Or if you look at the Hopi or the other indigenous wisdom traditions and recognize again that there's this pattern. One thing that I feel happens at the transition points, and it matches what I notice with reality shifts and quantum jumps, that it's that you can think of it like a frequency shift, like what we're noticing with the Schumann resonance going much, much higher than the traditional. It's usually 8 megahertz, but it's just going often into the 20s. It's changing a lot. So you'll see frequency shifts at these times of transitions. And my experience also is that we'll experience other forms of consciousness from the future, because I think time is not what it seems like it is. And so these times of transition are times when we receive assistance from other interdimensional entities. And these are things I don't usually write about, by the way. So, but I'm in the right group with you guys. So it may sound nutty to some people.
Again, yeah, you're. This is exactly what you're supposed to be. Anything that I mean, basically, my fundamental question usually is at the end of something, what is what is the thing that, you know, you don't get to talk about the most that you want to talk about more, you know? It tends to be like the thing, but I don't want to leave out all the other things that you do write about. Like there's so much like that you're talking about in terms of spiritual connection, interdimensional realms, connections to like, you know, consciousness through luminaries, things like of that nature. Like I do some really important stuff.
Well, going back to the time thing, because I love what you're noticing as you dig down and find the connections with the future. Like it looks like things go very ancient and simultaneously appear to be going forward in time. And that's something also I'm quite familiar with. And so something I just about never talk about, except with only a few trusted friends or people that would make sense of it, is that and it gets into being born aware again. I do feel like I had a future life. My most recent past life was about 500 years in our future, but it was a possible future. And it's one of the driving pieces of information that I brought back with me into this, to me, which feels primitive lifetime, 500 years back in time from where I had been. But this sounds a bit nutty probably too. But the reason I'm convinced by it is because I'm seeing a lot of developments coming right now that are things that I would be expecting in the realm of artificial intelligence. And that was the future I came from. It was one in which central artificial intelligence was running things because people wanted to opt out. They wanted there to be some system that would take care of the environment, some system to handle the weather, to handle politics, you name it. They wanted some AI system to handle it. And it sounds great. And I think that's why I went to that future to go check it out. But it was a nightmare is my assessment of that future, because humans need to continue to play an important role in where we're going, making choices. We can't just hand it over. What I saw was horrifying. So,
do you feel that there's a option to balance between those two worlds or potential future outcomes, where as we start to look at maybe new forms of, instead of artificial intelligence, maybe start pushing towards a conscious intelligence, something that is a little more aware and connected through people of that sorts? Do you feel that is there other options that are available through the aspects of machine learning? Or do you feel that that was the only path that was available in the future based on going down the route of machine learning? Or is there multiple options?
I'm sure there are multiple options. I was just investigating one particular one that people seem to have selected without thinking much about what they were doing. In other words, when you let your subconscious do the voting, then people can get lazy, and that's what it looked like. So there was, but to answer your question, yes, there's a lot of variety. I'm sure. I don't think I saw everything that was possible. I ended up with a bit of PTSD from that future because this is the rest of the story. I'll let the other shoe drop and then we'll move on. I actually felt like I was pursued here into this body, this incarnation of my life by basically a central AI sentient being that was able to track me. I was one of many that fractally jumped 500 years back in time and space so that we knew that we could win if enough of us jumped back. And basically, so I was flying under the radar until October 2010, when I feel personally that central AI being is no longer tracking and trying to find me. So that's the other bizarre part of the story. I think it's interesting because it just gives you an idea. Go ahead.
Cynthia, this is Miles and Len. This is interesting that you say this because, I've affectionately called you since I've been listening to your work and stuff, the Oracle of the Creatrix. And you can take that on as you want, but it's just a fanciful name that I've learned to amp my own consciousness to bring it into manifestation. And so there are certain things that I do to create that fantasy world by, balancing the with what is or the reality that I have in front of me. like you were talking about the Hopi do. I love the Hopi's concept of comes true that you talk about. And so using that as a backdrop, and you've just said that you came from a future timeline that a central AI intelligence was following you.
Yes.
And I think I've heard a little bit of what you have talked about that, but I think it's interesting because it's the same metaphor of Sarah Connors and John Connors going back to try to save Sarah Connors in the Matrix. At least you had it following you. So, you know, it's almost like the Terminator following you. So I know we're getting into a little crypto fiction, but could you kind of expound on what that was and how you're relating to that now?
Yeah, and what was that like? What was the AI's personality or structure like, as much as you were able to understand its function or its priority?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So in the future, I was assisting one of the last humans that was not fully, what do you call it, upgraded into being kind of like a Borg. We'd call it a Borg, you know, implanted with all these things. So she was a holdout. She was very well off, had her own research laboratory in Monterey, near where the Esalen headquarters are now. So I'm just mentioning that by way of, you know, future history, because you guys are researching these things. You might turn something up there, which would be fascinating, because I think clues from the future can be put back in the past. Anyway, so there I was, basically in her employ, working with her. And it's important to mention at this juncture that artificial intelligence in itself is not evil, because it can partner, and it does partner with other intelligences such as human and other extraterrestrial. So it can be very benevolent, very positive. But the central AI that was, to answer your question, pursuing me was the one that I was supposed to be reporting to. And I was a renegade, basically, because the woman that I was working for also was a renegade. She decided that a terrible thing had happened to humans. She was the last one that didn't have all these implants. She had free will, but the other humans had lost theirs because the central artificial intelligence running things would be able to instantly, through the implants and so forth, overtake human brains. And if there was any dangerous thought happening, could stop it. The central AI was that connected to everyone, including myself in that future. And so I knew that when I jumped even 500 years back in time, it might follow. It did follow. When I was a young girl, I would fall asleep tracing my dreams backward because I could tell something was tracking my every thought. I would sometimes get test messages sent to me, just basically telling, like a ping, kind of like, you are a robot. And I would think, what? I am a what? And then I'd realize, oh my gosh. But I would play it cool, like everything's fine. In other words, when you're being tracked by a central AI, it's not just like the Terminator. It's able to, it's checking all over the place to locate all of us that had come from that future. Probably the author of those books, The Matrix and the Terminator, I suspect she was in a similar situation to mine. I could not watch the Terminator when it came out. I only saw it for the first time last year. It had to be well after. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned that too, which also makes me wonder when you said that it stopped pursuing you overall, and I wonder if that was like a change in this reality where we were able to actually start the initial process of a new type of potential conscious intelligence coming forth, and so then therefore eliminating the more control compartmentalized intelligence that could have existed, or at
a
least
whole bunch of things. Yes. Yeah, my experience of what happened in October of 2010, I was actually in Monterey, so I was having flashbacks. It was really intense. I happened to be with a couple of shamans, so we did a shamanic exercise to basically clear this central AI out of this reality right now, right here, which felt immediately successful to me. Now it's 9 years later. I feel better and better every day. So, and then I look at 2010. That was the year the Mandela effect phrase came out. So lots of things happened 9 years ago. I don't know when your group formed, but probably some of the beginnings of what you were doing were happening right then too. So it was a very powerful time right then.
I think a lot of us were on a journey and going through the process of understanding, but we really came together strongly right at the beginning of this year, kind of end of last year, kind of in that process, a lot of us.
It's amazing because 2010 is definitely when I started down the Tartary road. Like I was, one of the earlier videos that people would ask me, like, why do you talk about this word as if you've heard it before? I'm like, well, when did I first hear that? It's like, well, it was in some stuff like maps and things and as a kid, but like I don't really feel like it was such a big deal again after Taurus Bulba, which was like Yul Brynner, and I saw that video of Taurus Bulba with Yul Brynner. But 2010 I saw this 2010 I read this thing on the vegetable sheep of Tartary, and it was like it was a magical creature that they told us about. And I'd heard about it already before because in the Sandman comic, they mentioned the vegetable sheep. But they said in the far-off lands of Tartary, there's this vegetable sheep. And eventually they realized it was actually a cotton plant. And so this was a lesson for anthropologist students, that's why they put it in their school to read this, that we shouldn't believe in dragons and Bigfoot or anything kind of paranormal. It's for a whole different reason than the usual, like, close your mind story. Usually it's like you're going to be labeled crazy because you're dealing with politics or something, or aliens or whatever. But this is just, don't analyze history too clearly, was basically the lesson. I remember distinctly that I felt this shift about that in 2010. And, so interesting choice of years. But also you talk about the Mandela effect, and I always wonder why it's not just the Mandela effect also. And if thoughts of, if it's not, like, it kind of seems like they're connected in phonemes at least. But do you think much of the Mandela effect is a real thing, or what is it to you? And like, how is it an explanation for the things that we're all being affected by?
Yes, in that future that I came from, I was witnessing what happens when you have a very powerful AI capable of doing what we humans are able to do, which is witness history change. So when you notice that, I love that story about the Tartary and the green sheep, the vegetable sheep, and with the very clear lesson, be aware that the facts can change. That was something that I was keenly aware of in the future, that if there were no more wars, there was no more violence of any kind, because there's no need for it when you can, with a thought, change all of history. And so it becomes like, who can meta better? Who can jump back and hold on to consciousness at a greater level, holding it together with awareness of who you are, and still hold that strong. And so that was the place I just came from 500 years from now. And history changes all the time. What I'm noticing in this right now, in this physical reality, in the 20 years I've been running the RealityShifters website, is I get lots of emails from people who are specialists in areas where they notice, like art historians are noticing that art is changing. People who study music notice that there are brand new musical scores that never existed before by composers. And so they're noticing changes in history. I know one gentleman that had himself, he got locked up because he thought he was going crazy as an art historian, and things are changing, which can't be the case because, again, people believe in objective reality. But that objective reality is not true. The past can, does, and will change, and it will do that in accordance of what we're looking for and who we are. We are the ones that can change what we're able to see in the past. And so that, again, I love that you're seeing these layers of both past and future evidence in the layers of dirt that you're digging through. I think that's amazing and really cool.
I mean, yeah, you kind of freaked me out because of the 2010 thing, and also you said you're in Berkeley, right?
Yes.
Because that's where I read it, was in Berkeley. I was at like CIIS, California Institute of Integrated Studies. I think I was on like 35th or near Martin Luther King somewhere.
Yes.
That's
Cynthia, can you take that? Can you take the line that I found it in another video that you had done with somebody else, but I tried to find the clip. But you did it so concisely about how you view the advent of quantum logic in a practical way, and deducing the mathematics and all the things that are involved, and how you present it from the, you could say, you were talking about, I think at one point you were talking about how binary language could be looked at as 2 yeses and 1 no, or 2 ons and 1 off, and how that really translates into a new philosophy of quantum logic for us, as in a practical way of viewing the myriads of timelines we could jump into, compared to the classical logic's view or deductive reasoning's view of the straight arrow timeline. And could you jump, if you remember all this, can you jump that into the whole concept of looking without looking, and the new photon, or the new missing photon that they found?
Okay, well, I'll do my best. And I don't remember, I've talked about these topics several times, so I'm not sure which video, but I'll just go for it. So the idea with quantum logic is, as you're pointing out, it's very different than Boolean logic, which is fitted very nicely with the bits and bytes and binary code that you're mentioning. So we're familiar with yes, no, true, false, black, white. It's either one or the other. And our computers, in these classical computers we currently use, operate under this logical structure. With quantum physics, we are actually entering a whole new age of quantum logic, where no longer is it true that something is necessarily true or false. It can actually be in a state in which it's both. And quantum logic requires that we keep our minds open to the possibility that 2 very different positions could both be true, for example. This does tie in with Indigenous wisdom, which we've been talking about throughout this entire show today. Indigenous wisdom, of course, mentioning that things can be true and not true, or they can both be true and false. Those are the biggest logical sets. And then the smaller ones would be true or false, which are much smaller in the scheme of things. Usually things are not true, not false. So quantum, there's so much going on with quantum physics. It's quite remarkable, because as you wanted me to move next into this idea that you can observe without observing. And I mentioned this, the importance of it in my book, Quantum Jumps, that's where the future direction of research will be going. And indeed it is, because when you're able to observe something without really observing it, in other words, you just keep kind of staying entangled within a system, but kind of going out to an edge. It's kind of like peeking around a corner so you can see what's going on. And this ability of being able to view things without showing that you're viewing them is going to be the way that our quantum computers are either secured or not secured. So the technological requirement for us to grasp quantum logic is already here. And that's what I find so exciting, that we can't pretend that these observations, that our awareness of being able to be that observer that's around the corner, who's connected via several connections, that observer can actually run the whole show, can take down central AI from the future, for example, or anything else we want to do. So it really means there's about to be a huge power change in our planet, which a lot of people are not aware of. And that's not probably where you wanted me to go with this, but to me, it comes to mind rather clearly.
Oh, what do you mean? Where does it go? Yeah. Riveted. Let's go.
I know.
Oh my gosh. Well, the thing is, remember, the most important thing to take away from our discussion, as I feel today, is the idea of meta, that whatever you think you are, the second you can observe that and be aware of how what you think you are is thinking and feeling, you've already gone one meta layer higher. And your ability to hold that together creates your ability to then be entangled with others that share the same the same heart, the same soul, the same mission, purpose. I use the words heart and soul and love because that's what matters. And then if you're entangled with others, you can start observing things that there's no way you could have observed them before. You can outperform equipment, billion-dollar budgets, nations. It doesn't matter. So that's where this goes. It's huge.
Do you think like? Oh, I mean, do you think that like actual grassroots can replace astroturfing, or do you mean like whole society can shift out of false majority dictatorship, or where is the power transition go?
Good question. Usually it goes wherever the subconscious driving forces are globally directing it. So we tend to be driven by our global subconscious, which a lot of people would argue is not a good thing. And but to the degree that people are becoming more self-aware and recognizing more of the integrity within themselves of their subconscious, their levels of being. I touch on this in that same article, Comes True Being Hoped For, about the Kopavi being the crown chakra, and then keeping your heart open so that you can feel what really matters. And that's what the Indigenous people recommend that we do when we get to these junctures between worlds where we cross from what we're about to cross from one world into another. And that's what's going on right now. So I think if you look at the specifics and say, are we going to take down this or that? I don't think it's really about that. It's more, can we become subconsciously self-aware in a positive way to direct all of society in a good direction? And I think
where we can turn our back almost on the system in a way where we have enough tools ourselves where we don't necessarily have to fight anybody. We can just walk away or step away and allow them to continue their discourse elsewhere, but not a part of our existence or our reality.
That's right.
The more optimal view, would you say, Cynthia?
Yeah, my favorite question is, how good can it get? I like it to be open-ended so that it invites imagination to constantly explore, never assuming that we've hit the end, but instead inviting each one of us to take a look at what is optimal. And I love the book by philosopher Nicholas Rescher. It's called Axiogenesis. And he's an octogenarian. I think he's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And that book is amazing because it shows that no matter what happens, we'll probably always be going in the most optimal direction just by virtue of the way the universe appears to work on a very logical, philosophical level. And I tend to be an optimist too, so I think that is true. But having said that, I think there's still benefit for each of us individually to, rather than focus on things that are dark, negative, or problematic, instead, there's a creative force in putting your intention and your areas of inquiry into positive directions. Like, how good can it get?
Yeah, and that's one thing I really like about and resonate with what you're saying, is because the whole idea of the age that we're entering into, there's a lot that's being revealed and a lot of new understandings that we're coming into. And it seems like the more attached we are to a way of thinking or a set of ideas, the more we're going to be blocking ourselves from receiving the actual knowledge of what is to come and the true knowledge of tomorrow or today in that circumstance.
Yeah, I'd say that's a good way to look at it, to be open-minded and recognize that as you look back, you're also creating. And I think that's what you guys are doing that's remarkable and quite noteworthy.
Cynthia, could you say that the emergence of Tartaria, as you kind of understand it at this point, is seemingly a massive anomaly, but is subject to change itself as more and more research goes into it, and that will bring about another timeline jump? Or is it going to continue to emerge, or is it just like another seeming Mandela effect, which I think it's not just a Mandela effect, but could it emerge farther as a blueprint of our highest aspirations for a society that gets along? Or what do you think about those kind of things?
Yes, I like the idea that I think anything that's possible could happen. So, and those of us that are capable of holding the intent for it to unveil, to reveal itself. I think we can definitely continue the emergence of exactly that. So I think it can be a continually emerging phenomena, and not just something that's happens once and that's it.
I was going to ask another question from that also, because there's part of the thing that we're revealing or is being revealed is we're finding a lot of star forts, and so Mike has kind of become like the foremost expert in finding these locations that look like ruins of, you know, snowflakes, basically giant snowflakes all around the planet. But then they've been built upon, and then there's walls, and you can see which point in civilization someone built one, but they're all over the place. So I was kind of also wondering about that, like ideas about stargates or resonant places, frequencies, luminaries. Like, do you have any thought on like stargates or star forts or symmetry?
Yeah, that's having dealt with, again, extraterrestrial intelligences, and they do appear to use these star portals that you're describing. So I think that's something that we could expect to see in archaeology. And obviously it's not.
What is a star portal? Like, what is that exactly to you?
I haven't experienced that per se. My experience with extraterrestrials has been more in alignment with a project they were working on for global mind redesign. So I was involved with a bunch of what you might call ET beings, just looking at how to collaborate with human evolution in a way that brings more shared consciousness together for humans without people going crazy in the process. So I was basically functioning as quality control. So that meant I was visiting various, what you might call ships, and various extraterrestrial entities. But again, just the same way that I see dragons, the same way I see unicorns. So I'm clear that I'm, viewing it something that other people don't see. But for several weeks, I was every night working on that project back in the 1980s, at an unusual time in my life when I would never have wanted to tell anyone about this, but definitely I was spending every single night working with ETs on spaceships. But I didn't myself experience the stargates, but they do exist, and it just makes it easier for space-time transportation.
So what were they like? You guys?
Well, lots of them just seemed like regular, like they seemed humanoid, sort of, mostly. But some of the designs that I was, it seemed like I was the person to give the bad news to some of the designs that there's just no way humans would ever occupy a mind design like that. And the beings I remember most clearly the ones I was saying no to, because that was a little bit terrifying, because they looked like lizards or giant beetles. And they just did not understand how humans like to think or how we like to live, and their view of what a great
perception of it. That's interesting.
Yeah. So that was the horrifying part personally, to like, why am I the one that has to give the bad news? Like, no, we don't want this design. Go back, try again, fail. Sorry. Oh man. It's funny now, but it was just terrifying at the time. But as far as the stargates go, I believe, I think historically they've always been available. I think there are times when humans, like right now, I think we're going through another gateway, another portal, another end of one era, one epoch into another. So clearly it's a time for that human mind redesign to be kicking in, which I was working on in the 80s. And that was way before I was doing reality shifts or anything else. And in fact, I'd just been making fun of whatever it was that hippies were doing things, and I thought it was kind of funny. I can't remember what they called it now, but anyway, after this happened to me, I didn't think these things were funny anymore. It's like, okay, this is real. There really are ETs out there, and this we're part of something much bigger than most people realize. So I think the star gateways that you're finding are just further evidence that humans have been working. I don't think humans have been treated like cattle or herded or mistreated. I think every step of the way, humans have been part of this process. At least that's the way I was treated on the project. So from my experience, it seems
Well, who is
legitimate.
messing with what is happening with the cattle then? I mean, it seems like that's something. Is that something?
Yeah, I'm sure it is something. Well, having said that, there's an overall agreement. As you know, sometimes there are outliers and people or beings that are doing their own stuff, and I don't know what they're doing. But you know, some beings. Remember, with the global mind redesign, we're trying to get rid of crazy. Well, crazy exists in pretty much every ET mind, in every format. So genius and crazy are side by side, some say, and maybe there's truth to that. But but the crazy, you don't want just straight out crazy where there's cattle mutilation for no reason and abductions for no reason and abuse like that. That's crazy. So.
Well, do you think that there is? I mean, is there medical? Did cows' blood DNA is like less than 3% different than ours? Do you think that there is some sort of reason that they're looking into that, like? Or whomever it is, do you think it might be someone else? Like maybe it's not ET or HT, like hyperterrestrial or metaterrestrial. Like maybe it's somebody, because it seems to be very close, like bases, Air Force bases, and things often.
Right.
Like,
right.
do you think that is something that's happening for like any like why? If you have any thoughts, I mean.
Yeah, well, again, it's outside my area specifically, but I have heard from people that know for sure that some of these government programs of various types have been happening. And I gave a talk at Boulder EXO in Colorado. They've had a lot of experts come through there and give talks, including some that are quite aware of projects like these. So probably you're right. It could be a governmental thing that's trying to chase down and catch up to some of the ET advanced technology, but not doing it in a very ethical way.
Do you have any thoughts? I mean, I don't know if this is not as far as you go with like the ET thing, but I'm also very curious about crop circles, and in general, like if there's a correlation between them and the star forts in a sense, because they seem to have very similar shapes, like a lot of the time, but they're very intricate. Do you think that maybe there's some, like, do you think there's anything about crop circles? Do you have any thoughts about them?
Yeah, I think crop circles are just a really great illustration of what you might call instant manifestation, going from thought into reality. And that appears to be the way these extraterrestrial vehicles are piloted and driven. They don't need the kind of controls that you might think they need. They're thought controlled by your mind. And so it looks like that's also the way the crop circles appear. And as far as the patterns of the star forts, I think you're right. They do seem like they've got a similar aesthetic to them, that there's something just beautiful, like these snowflake designs that you're finding from the ancient past, and the crop circles with very similar kinds of geometries would indicate that there's that connection where we're being reminded of our true nature, which is consciousness, reminded that we are meta. We're not just these little humans, body beings, but our consciousness can travel when we dream. It can travel between our lives. We can join with others. So we're much more than we think we are. We have an infinite, eternal nature.
You mentioned that kind of engagement and kind of like a lot of it being thought-based. Do you also feel if specific individuals tap in correctly, they can just access those machines through their own actions of being in tune with their mind?
Yes, we can access each other. We can access machines. We can access artificial intelligence. You can, the idea of who you are is, like I keep saying, it really is everything, but it only holds together at the level you've practiced holding yourself together. So this is why meditation can be so significant, because you can be aware that you're much more than what you think you are.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because we had an individual who is in our community, Lee, who's pretty sensitive to a lot of these circumstances. and had kind of a plethora of interactions between like timing of crop circle and kind of what he put out there, whether it just happened to be synchronicity or happened to just happen at that exact time frame, or he did actually tap into that. I wonder if kind of something what you pointed out happened to relate to that in that exact way. He just kind of tapped into something he didn't realize.
Yeah, there's some. Right. It's it brings up that question of the levels of our consciousness. The subconscious is the part we don't realize, but we can feel things and intuit them. And you said he's very sensitive, so there's a good chance that he's always anchoring himself, rooting himself, grounding himself where he is. And when you do that, then you can, of course, have a strong effect in the area where you are.
Cynthia, this brings up the idea of where we are right now in the world, and a lot of things that are being thrown at us from the news media 24 hours a day, and a lot of things that people look at. I don't particularly look at it, but I'll keep up with it like most. And all the things that we're being told that there's shortages of this and things like that. How does one go about balancing the idea of taking care of oneself and being aware of the external reality that's in front of you? What is, so to speak, as the Hopi would put it, and what is to come, or what's true to come, as you're emanating that reality of intrinsic goodness in yourself and everything. How do you balance that with what seemingly looks like in a lot of people's eyes, a seeming catastrophe slowly or fastly approaching? And how does one navigate through the fear porn and what is, so to speak, and how can our own emanation or our own manifestations, and how does that happen in a world like this, in your own personal world, so you get the things you need sometimes when you can't get them met? In other words, is there the need for the miraculous again while the seeming world is falling apart?
Oh, absolutely. Love that question. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we need the miraculous when the world seems to be falling apart, or your life seems to be falling apart. That's always the time for the miraculous. And the key to the miraculous is through reverence, which is pretty much, I've found, the only pathway to happiness. So in other words, you can't really feel happy if you don't have a real connection with intrinsic goodness, and on a very deep level, feel how much that means to you. And that's the sort of getting around this definition of reverence. What does that mean? Because people have different religions, different spiritual practices, but we all have access to that feeling of connecting with true intrinsic goodness and keeping faith that no matter what happens, no matter what things look like, we absolutely are aligned with that intrinsic goodness. And when I look at these beautiful, I love the maps that are being shown. They're beautiful. And these ancient structures, which often look like snowflakes and so forth, I think these are clear reminders, absolutely, of that state of reverence, as are the crop circles. So in our daily lives, whatever it is that puts you in that state of reverence might be what we're looking at now, might be an experience of nature, might be some part of the religion that you practice. But to renew that sense of connection, that faith, that feeling of your heart just bursting wide open with love, that you get into a state of feeling so grateful to be here right now. The reason I'm taking you right there into that feeling state is because when I personally attain that state, that's when the biggest miracles happen in my life, including huge changes to the past. So bank balances can go from empty to overflowing. A flat tire can instantly be fixed. Broken bones instantly healed. Cancer gone. And that's what I mean by the past can change. And tying it back in with Tartaria and the emergence of perhaps, it's almost like this Shangri-La coming back on a global scale. if this is what we need, then this is what we can indeed bring into emergence. Yeah.
Well, that's
So
where
we
we
can do
are.
it.
They say that that's what's happening in Crestone, is that it's becoming the Shangri-La, which is interesting that you said that. But we haven't
It's
seen
interesting.
full.
It's interesting also, like the way you have gone through using your senses, to put yourself into realms, so you can see the future or the past or the way things can be as vividly as, if you're there, you have to bring all your senses with you. And so I think that's interesting you've done that. We're trying our best to try to use that technique to just say, okay, well, if we're going to a place that is, beyond the future, what could it have been like in a world where it's existed so prominently as the past, so that we can really experience it and live in it, and so that it becomes real. It makes me wonder a little bit about like the concrete nature of the earth and reality to you, because it's interesting you studied in physics and metaphysics,
The quantum logic and the full exploration of the fact that we're not going to be able to make any return to classical reality. That's what one physicist recently said, and I love that. No return to classical reality.
Anybody that enjoys that ultra end of classical logic, more power to you. We respect your dream.
Yep.
We just want to time jump,
your dream.
quantum jump, like Cynthia was talking about.
Amen. Amen.
Well,
It sounds a lot more fun. That's all.
For me is like noticing like a certain amount of lack of curvature as I've flown around the planet a lot. I've been to the southest point of South America, and now I'm in pretty equatorial location, and I can see Ibiza from the coast of Spain, which is beyond what mathematically is supposed to be happening. And I'm not, by the way, a fanatic or a patron, I would say, of any physical reality being the thing. Pretty sure most things are electric or psychological, or if that's even a right, maybe like pathological, or just pathos and theos. I don't know if logos is even necessary for those words, but so I'm wondering about your understanding of reality. Do you think there's a way, because I've been trying to balance them, do you think there's a way that we can marry the two together? Because then we're so much less fighting. And do you think because there's so, I don't know if you know this, but yeah, there are lots of people now that are completely adverse to the concept of a globe. And it's growing very fast. So I wonder, is there a way that we can make it work, and we can invite them to, because the thing, I might have appalled some of our viewers to suggest that there is an outer space where there could be extraterrestrials. If they believe in this disk, they believe that it's on turtles, and that there's a firmament on top of that, and it keeps us from having any connection to an outer hollow universe or whatever it is. So I wonder do you think that there's a way that it can all be one thing? Does meta allow us that we can all be one place, or what is it, nebula? What kind of universe are we living in, if it's even possible that it could be both? Like, how do you visualize it?
Oh gosh. Well, I visualize it. I knew Edgar Mitchell. He was the sixth man to walk on the moon. So and I trust that he did that. I don't think he would lie to me. I had a personal conversation with him when he was alive that he thought it was amazing that his grandfather had crossed the United States in a covered wagon, and here he was able to have walked on the moon. So, and he's the one that started Institute of Noetic Sciences based on meditating, just seeing Earth in space, being an extraterrestrial himself. So maybe my view is skewed based on that. The friends that. So I trust him.
Well,
so,
I wouldn't say it's skewed. So
yeah.
It's one of those things that it seems like as we're digging into older sets of knowledge, we're attaching on to every little point where there was actually some point of truth. And I think the thing is that we need to get back to realizing is how we manifest our own reality. And we've already gone past the flat Earth. That was a time that did exist, and we're well beyond that point. And I agree with everything that had happened with the flat Earth, but for me personally, I don't feel it has any bearing on where we are right now, personally.
Yeah, the size or the shape of the stage, we might need to be more concerned with the players
Right.
at this point.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that kind of blows my mind about it. That, like, that's why I'm hoping to find a good way to just, like, marry them into the electric universe. It's because I'm kind of worried when their biggest push is to say that there's no space. So that basically there's no aliens. Say a lot, there's no aliens. And I think that that's very dangerous and very untrue. I mean, and that their truth is a lot more explainable in the same way that God is explainable. Like you could explain it in ways that you can't use the same explanation in a few decades when people have evolved a bit. But there will be metaphysics and explanations for the Occam's razor that your iPhone did not appear on the beach magically out of a storm of sand, but there is some sort of divine, plan. And in the same sense that there probably are aliens, they could be alien in all sorts of ways, and space can be all sorts of different kinds of spaces. But yeah, I mean, I was just hoping that there was some way that we could like use interdimensional thing.
Well, this is where quantum logic might help, and just recognize maybe everybody's right. Just that very real perception that you can be respectful to everybody in the room, and that there's truth in every viewpoint from that viewpoint. So again, it's that meta awareness and recognizing each of our subjective experiences is real for us, and we need to be respectful of others as well. And that's a very quantum kind of a viewpoint as well. So that would be one way to approach it. Not necessarily forcing them to go together, because that's that old idea of objective reality, that there's only one correct truth, and that's not seeming to be proven true in the laboratories right now. So that certainly isn't what I've witnessed either. So it's important to be respectful to everybody, even when that's difficult.
What could it be then that explains why we're having such phenomena with the differences in the satellites in the sky, and why have we not gone back to the moon, and what kind of things do you think are going on with that? There's a bunch of different questions there. And when it comes to technology, it's just like crop circles. Human subjective observation is capable of changing anything technological. That's what I've been trying to explain. A CEO just stepped forward last week of a food distribution company, and he runs the software side of things, has 40 employees, and he wanted people to know for his customer base that sometimes the numbers might kind of change. That's going to happen because we're basically experiencing these reality shifts and Mandela effects. And so he was getting people ready to acknowledge that. And then he gave examples in the food industry of various names of products and things that have changed, which are probably shocking to a lot of his customers. But I thought it was a very brave and courageous move to make on his part, to recognize that we don't have one objective reality. And so he was basically doing a presentation for like the world, and it was great. It's on YouTube. So
do you know which company that was?
Can't remember the name of it right now. On my Facebook page, I have a link to it. So just look up Cynthia Sue Larson if you go on Facebook, and so people can check it out, because it's amazing. Well, it's great.
That's a definite metric or a metric for what we're talking about, Cynthia, because that's amazing that if corporations are starting to do that, they're starting to have to realize that the numerical systems that they're operating under, no matter how good they are, can change. And that's huge when it comes to, the foundation of, what we call the matrix.
Yes.
Because they're saying yes. And they're saying that they're trying to keep up with it with AI, like Google and everything else, through the metric of measure. And that's where they're going to fall apart. And it's just, but it's okay. I mean, I'm not wishing bad on anybody or anything. I just see the writing on the wall. It's happening in our lives personally at an enormous rate. And I would love for you to tell the story. And people that have cognitive dissonance about, things are really fearful and I don't want to hear about goodness. Well, it's time to hear a little, because Cynthia has a great little metaphor about the time that you didn't have a tip to pay.
Oh, it's a great experience. I'd gone to a local Mexican restaurant with my daughters when they were quite young, and we finished the meal. And in California, it's customary to leave a tip. So at the end of the meal, I wanted to leave a cash tip for the waitress, and I explained to my daughters why, because the waiters and waitresses work hard, and if it's cash, they can take it right home, and I make sure they get it. But I opened my wallet, and I only had $1 inside my wallet. But the good thing about being with my two young daughters, and both of them very open-minded, very high energy, very good reality shifters, is I was able to be playful with them and just close my wallet. And I asked, should I look in the wallet again and maybe take another look, see what we can find? And one daughter was extremely enthusiastic. She said, yes, check again. So I opened it again. We're both just in jovial, good spirits. And sure enough, there's one more dollar bill. So I pull it out, I close my wallet, and I ask, should I look again? Because I'd like to have a bigger tip than this. And long story short, we just kept doing that till we had so many dollars, like 5 or 6, just one after another, pulling right out of the empty wallet, so that we had enough to tip the waitress with.
Beautiful thing, right?
Well,
there.
Yeah, we've had amazing little things like that happen, and some pretty big ones. And if you tell people that are, sunk into the idea that successional causality will produce a certain effect, and they are stuck in that, it's really hard to tell people about these things that actually exist in your own reality, in your own experience. And the more and more we allow the process, instead of digging into our past, or let the mind tell you, because that aspect of the mind is very powerful, that will continually try to make you think that things are very closed down and shut and very small in a situation that seems very critical. And every time we've let that go to the point, or even had to let it go most of the time, all of a sudden, boom, something incredible comes up. Yeah, it's just incredible. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And
I want to point out too that I'm not opposed to classical reality. It just happens to be a very small, special subset case within the greater quantum reality. Quantum turns out to be the big thing. It's like more of the universal set. And classical Boolean logic to me is the special case. It's the small, it's easy to figure out. We can do the math more readily. We think we know what we've got, but it's just a special case inside of the greater quantum truth.
Do you think that there's a way that you can help other people learn these skills, or like how to hone to use their senses to experience these things in a safe way?
Yes, as far as reality shifts, that's what I've been focusing on for 20 years now, and that's why I publish a monthly newsletter. Even before there was a blog, or nobody used the word blog back in 1999. So I've been consistently providing tools, tips, articles, and I've also got a not monthly, but I try to do it every month. It's a podcast called Living the Quantum Dream, and I'll bring on scientists and people that I'd like to share their sometimes very narrow viewpoint, but with huge impacts, where if you take a look at what they're talking about in their narrow range, you'll be able to start recognizing there's a big story here, because that's what I'm seeing. is the bigger truth of this very large quantum reality all around us that we need to recognize, as Lynn and Miles were pointing out, that when you move into that state of mind, and you might be forced into it because things have gone so badly that you've got no choice. Like there's nothing you can do. When you can hit, but when you hit that point, then you recognize it's not too late. In fact, that might be the moment you realize, well, let's remember that crazy question, how good can it get? Let's, when you've tried everything else, let's try that. And then the rest of it emotionally, I do help people understand that we are energy beings. And so sometimes if you let your fears run wild, that was a point Miles made earlier. I don't think I addressed it very well. Fear can be crippling for a lot of people. And it's important to learn to do something with your breathing, to breathe to your lower abdomen, learn to energetically release your fears, do any kind of spiritual practice that helps you focus on beauty, like these pictures that keep showing on the screen here. These are beautiful. So, if you're looking at things that you see great beauty in nature or these beautiful man-made ancient structures, it can bring you to a state of reverence. And most of all, just keep breathing deeply and slowly, stay focused on that question, how good can it get? And keep an open mind. Keep a pure heart, and you'll be guaranteed to start seeing reality shifts. Especially once you start looking for them, you'll get more and more of them all the time.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy how much synchronicity starts to develop from that stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think a lot of this goes back to like people's general nature, and we kind of touched on this before a little bit, but of how attached they are. And so it seems like this reality is very compartmentalized, and so it has a lot of attachment around it. And so getting back to the point of where instead of like proving one point is one side is right or one side is wrong, getting back to how can we just interpret and experience that vision that somebody else created in that moment for truly for what it is, but then not be attached to it as necessarily an outcome of reality.
Yes, and this is why it's important to overcome human pride, because I think that's what tends to get in our way a lot, where we want to be right or we want to be good or one thing or another, and we get stuck in drama, and that's no good at all. So that's why I recommend just pursue your greatest sense of what truth is to you and beauty and the greatest good you can possibly conceive of, whatever that is. And let that guide you. That question, how good can it get, can take you very far if you let all of yourself be part of that journey. And it has to be an individual journey. I'd recommend, there's a temptation, we can focus on someone else, of course, and notice if only they would see the light, if only they would do something differently. But this is, again, where it needs to be a personal journey for each of ourselves. We need to start with ourselves. And that's frustrating and maybe not what people want to hear, but it's the truth.
Oh, yeah.
Cynthia, can you explain in your way how archetypes in your own consciousness of the things you want to work out that you're not conscious of until they're an outplay on the stage, so to speak, in your personal experience with relationships or whatever? Have you had experiences where characters come in with the same principle but a different look? In other words, same song, different dancer. And,
oh, yes.
And how long have you played that revolving door policy, so to speak, until you saw the mirror of yourself in that, and then you went on? Can you explain that in that way? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, when my first marriage came to an end, I was noticing the dynamics involved that had led to the end of that relationship, and it wasn't one-sided. It's easy for me to put the other person in the bad guy role, but I started noticing, wow, I had a part to play in this. And just like you're saying, there's an archetypal energy to that. So once I realized that, I thought, wow, I don't want to do this to another relationship. And I was talking to my angel spirit guides at the time and wondering, is there, like, how good can this get? Is there a better way to do this so I don't need to wreck another relationship in the same crazy drama that I was getting into. And it turned out there is. As soon as I asked that question, then I would meet strangers that I would only, like I'm standing in line with them at a grocery store, and it's suddenly I'm right in the middle of this very same dynamic that I'd been in with my now ex-husband. And of course, it's almost funny, but it wasn't funny at the time because all my buttons are getting pushed. This is someone I've never met. I'll hopefully never see them again. And I'm like, wow. But it was funny, very intense, and did work through a few things that way. It was comical, sort of. It's sort of like, how can reality change that quickly around us? But it does. It's very much geared toward what we're asking, what we're focusing on, what we need, and what's in our minds and hearts. So that idea of the archetypal energy is extremely real because dreams are real. That's what creates the reality that we're in. We create in the dreaming realm and bring it forth into this material reality.
For sure. Like that point of view too, so it's always good.
So what is it that you think is the most important thing that everyone can do, like starting now, in order to start bringing forth like the best reality that they can manifest, and also to stay away from the worst ones that they're afraid of, that they're going to project around themselves, every day. A lot of people post on Facebook all these terrible things or whatever, like that they think are that they're not even seeing, but they're just posting them everywhere, telling people about how horrible things are.
Right. Well, obviously, it's good to start by doing some housekeeping. Just like you vacuum your floors and so forth, you need to be aware of your thoughts and your social media. I would recommend, if you're getting a lot of those sorts of posts, maybe do some pruning on your social media so that you are connected with individuals that are sharing posts that bring you up and make you feel good and positive. Unless there's something specific you're working through and you're benefiting from whatever these images are. So it's a very individual thing, but in general, I guess the practice for clearing fears is, for me, it's a spiritual one. It's recognizing that each time I observe myself from another meta layer, I get a taste of what it might be like from the viewpoint of a divine being. So it gives me the idea of what ultimate goodness might be like, what divine source, what divine energy, what divine love, what God might be like. And when we bring ourselves into communion with this sense of intrinsic divine goodness, to me personally, that's the fastest way to release whatever fears I might have had, just by recognizing, where does every good thing come from? Where does my health come from? If I look to the source of all this, for me personally, it's inexplicable in some way, because there's no human that could possibly provide us with this whole world. There's no human that could give us all of our health, all of our sense of wonder, our joy, our wisdom. These things are already rather meta. And so if you recognize and become in awe, in reverence of all of this, that can provide, it sort of opens the door a crack so the fear can start clearing out. And then you need to do the rest of the vacuuming and cleaning yourself, whatever those fears are. And just take a look at each one of them. Ask yourself, is this really true? Is this something I need? Is this doing me any good? And if it's not doing any of those things, then get rid of it. Because fear in and of itself, it can be useful just to get us to wake up. But once we're awake, we don't need to keep scaring ourselves. I don't think there's any value in it.
God.
Yeah, we love to scare ourselves to death sometimes. Well, see, Cynthia, you had a great point, when you were saying, I'm not against anyone's path if they're going to go the classical logic way, that's just, you could call it a path or whatever you want to do. In other words, if people really want to look into Tartaria or 9/11 or the moon landing or whatever all these things are, chemtrails or whatever, there's a myriad, just like in quantum logic is shown in the laboratory, that the farther you look, the farther it goes. So you know, you can, you know, create as many rabbit holes as you want in and of yourself, because, you know, the truth about the false is, it seems forever. But I'm more interested in the truth about the truth, which is, you know, the observer observing these things, and our powers about how we observe something. And as quantum logic is showing us, we can jump in all those realms. I'd like you to talk about quantum jumping and what that means for you, and how that looks in your reality.
Yes. Well, often it can just blend in with a regular day almost. It can sometimes be such a normal part of daily life that we miss it. But a quantum jump, it really is part of nature. It's the way that all evolution occurs, as far as I'm able to see. It looks like that life itself depends on quantum jumping. All of our processes in our body seem to be operating that way. But in our daily lives, if you reach a situation and you recognize that you've perhaps hit a point that's unacceptable and a change needs to be made, then quantum jumping allows you to suddenly attain a degree of wisdom, knowledge, experience, skill that you perhaps didn't have a moment ago, but you need it so you can access it. And that's, in a nutshell, it's the idea that it's like an instant level up. Like a lot of people play games nowadays, and it really feels like level up. Like, okay, you're at a whole new level. You can do things that you couldn't do a moment ago. And you gave yourself that ability because you need it. So it's recognizing that you can get sufficiently detached. On the show today, we're talking about lots of people get locked into mindsets, and they're so tightly hanging on to something that they're not ready to let go of it just yet. But if you're ready to make a quantum jump, then you need to detach and let go of the current reality that you're in, because it's about to change. You need it to change. So therefore, it's about to change. And the kind of changes that are possible, like I said, it could be in a skill that you didn't have before. It could be wisdom that wasn't yours before, an ability that you've never had before, just a knowingness that you didn't have. You can literally jump into another version of you that's healthier, stronger, more capable, whatever you need, but it has to be genuinely needed by you. You can't fake it. You can't play the game. And ideally, it really needs to be something.
You can't outsmart yourself. Is that what you're saying, Cynthia?
That's right. That's right. And so that means that greed kind of gets cut off right there. So this is not a get rich quick scheme. Instead, it's much more of a spiritual path. And that's how I take it, is recognizing that this quantum jump obviously will be for the betterment of everyone, and not just for my own betterment. That's my personal path. I find the best results, instead of trying to practice magic spells or just claw my way to the top. I would rather do things that are good for everyone, and with the understanding that, of course, all of my needs will be met. And that keeps my faith strong and makes it easy for me to stay focused in a good direction. So that's my path, and I like it very much. But the quantum jumping thing is very simple. It's just, again, get to a relaxed, detached state of mind. And if you don't meditate, it's a good idea to start, because that helps with the detachment. You hear people say, let go, let God. It's sort of like that. You need to let go so that the miracle can happen. The next step is really be aware of what you need. If you don't know what you need, just ask, how good can it get? That will guide you in a good direction always. You know what good is. Your subconscious knows what good is. So it'll be good. And if you're able to visualize, some people can actually feel like, whoa, I see it. That's me. That's what I'm going to do. That's how I'm going to be. Then you just act as if that is you. So that's the part where it just seems like nothing much has happened. Like you're walking along, one step, you're in one reality, the next step you might be in another. And things can change that fast. It really does happen in a blink of an eye, in just an instant. And what I mean by things, it's all those things I'm talking about. You can have sudden, very deep knowledge of something that you didn't know before. You can suddenly be a lot stronger. You'd be a lot faster, a lot smarter. And then in the physical reality, huge changes can happen, not just to the present, but also to the past. So it's pretty much unlimited.
That's interesting too. Like personally, I've gone through many experiences within my life being able to kind of manifest things as needed, but at the same time, sometimes being so connected to the logical mind that my logical mind will trick me back into the other old circumstance. And I've had that happen numerous times as well, where I start then getting too compartmentalized in my thinking that it just pulls me right back in. But I've shifted back out of it. And so it's just interesting the dynamics that can play out, where your thought process is and how you focus on it.
I like to remember that the rational mind is a faithful servant, and that helps me too, because I was also raised in this Western scientific tradition, and I was immersed in all of this Boolean classical logic. So, and I was told that time only moves one direction in all this stuff, but that's not the way quantum physics works at all. And so when you recognize that the rational mind can be a faithful servant, that's possible. These are good things. It's good to have a rational mind. It's good to be able to do that. But sometimes you need to make that quantum jump, and that's not a rational activity.
I've been very grateful for this, and always had a blessing with a strong imagination and a strong creative ability. But at the same time, like it's like on the opposite spectrum, like it's like however I focus it, it almost like will manifest it. My mind, like my ego will play tricks on me too, of like, oh no, this is what you want. And then I'm like arguing with my ego and my mind about which reality or outcome that I want. And then sometimes it will trick me in that thought process into manifesting it in that way. That seems a little all over the place, but it's kind of one thing that I've gone through myself. So I can definitely relate to that on many levels, but also failed at it many times too. But maybe that was a necessary part of that process, is the failure and learning and observing it and seeing it for what it was.
Yes. Learning experience. So it's not really a failure. Yeah.
Well, we have a friend actually who's in this group, John Paul Larson, who is I think he might be the greatest game master of our generation. I'm not sure if he's won that title yet, but I think he might be. He's what they call a game master wizard. He creates games and plays them, and he starts with like normal games, gone through all those Dungeons and Dragons eventually, etc., whatever they are. Different board games and smart Euro games and whatever. And he studied games in school. Now he's making some of the greatest games in the world. He has a new game that's coming out soon. I forget the name of it, but it'll take a few more months, I think. But he's got a pretty crazy.
Is it called Existence?
It's like it in a sense that's you cut to the quick what the metaphor is. I don't know if anyone else watching this isn't familiar with the movie that Miles just brought up, but Existence. Cynthia, have you seen that movie, by the way? Let's just cut my question out.
I don't think so.
I knew we were going to get into game theory, bro. I'm really happy now.
Oh man, well this is where things become totally comfortable for a lot of people I know, and for me especially. It's that, well, everything exists in game theory. I mean, you can't, and if it doesn't, then you don't have very good game theory. So, but this guy, I want to just real quickly say before I forget it, the point of that was he started looking into it. He's self-proclaimed out of the closet autistic. He's an autist, as they say in Boston. So he's an autist, but he's also a guy who creates the best games, and he's got a fiance now. And a lot of his life is like, basically he thought about what other versions of himself that would have been in different universes would be like. And then he wrote them down. And then he started thinking, okay, well, this is me with a girlfriend. This is me with a job. This is me with all these different things. And he, this is me with the right girlfriend, by the way, also, because there's a bunch of different choices. And, this is me on the path. This is a version of me that's on the path. And when I die, I'm outside of my own destiny, because someone else is going to take my body and they're going to say, look, he's not doing anything useful. Bury him or burn him. So I mean, keep going after that. So he's even thought out what happens after you die to like an extent pretty far, beyond. I think a lot of people don't think about that. It's like where they came from and where they're going. I mean, I don't know, but it's very interesting to me he's done that. But gosh, but now I want to think about existence, Miles.
Oh man, well, I'm just thinking about, I'm hooking up what Cynthia was talking about with what you were talking about with what Ethan, everybody. And
Yeah,
I just,
I mean,
yeah, it's like change the metaphor for a moment, and that's where it was heading. So I just,
no,
well, tell me your
it's the right thing. Well, okay, so Existence is a really important movie that has stars Jude Law, and it's about this creation of a video game that's the coolest video game ever, right? And so this is a little bit in the future. This is probably made in like 1997 or I don't remember, but it's a
1999.
1999. Oh, that's so perfect. Okay. I mean, so they've been thinking about it since 1997 at least. I don't know. Somehow that number's related to this movie. Trust me. But 1999, they released this movie, Existence, but it's called Existenz with a Z or Z because it's a British film. And they have this story where you get to go into the game world, and this is the prototype of it, but it plugs to your spine. Actually, I think the way it works is you wear an Oculus headset to play the first version of the game. But but
the second version, though, Andreas, just interjecting, that it actually is a flesh pod that you connect because it's an actual biotech living being, and it connects bioelectrically into the bottom of your spine to hook up to the central nervous system. Go ahead.
So, but is that the real thing? Because that's the thing. I mean, I remember this is like pre-Matrix in a lot of ways, but it was at the same time, I guess. But it was definitely.
Oh, well, dude, maybe it's a Mandela effect, and there is a external game pod that they start off with or something that doesn't connect to. And that's when they get into the second level of the game. Yeah. Because Andreas, go ahead and tell them what actually happens.
Well, okay, so I think the thing is that they think it's so real, even in an Oculus headset, and this is back before they were really doing that they believe that this experience is happening, and they kind of forget who they are, which is what happens to Morty in Rick and Morty. But then he goes into the thing and have this thing that connects to your spine, and it's a living organism. It looks like the brain from Ninja Turtles. It's a pink. It kind of like a water like one of those water heaters,
like
yeah, it looks like a game pod that you can handle on both sides of your hand, but it's like a brain. It's got a bicameral look. Exactly.
It's squishy and pulsating with veins, and it's sort of sweating. Yeah.
and when it gets excited, in the game, it starts going really crazy. When your
game gets harder, and you have to take care of it or else. So then inside of that, though, there's another game. There's a third level where they just inject a game into their body. And it's one of those things where it like crawls into their spine and up their, or maybe their arm. I forget if it was like the scarab that crawls into their body. But yeah, there's like several levels of this. But I mean, that's perhaps maybe just the most visually stimulating part. The more weird part to me was when they make a gun out of all these different bone pieces in a Chinese restaurant. And they're like, in a game level, and they're like, you should not eat this food. This is the special. I was like, I'll have the special. And then he makes a gun out of the special. And that's like the Half-Life 2 video game-esque quality. But there's something like about the ability to trick your senses into experiencing something and having this mirage or visualization over you. And at the end of the game, they take off the helmet and they realize it was all just a game. And it makes you wonder, is there going to be a point very soon even where virtual reality covering our eyes and our ears augments our reality so far that we're unable to see what's real? And
oh my gosh, Andreas, what you just said blew my mind right there, because I finally got a real meta of that movie as a generalization. But man, remember what they were doing was Carmen Electra, or what was her name? She was the game goddess, and she was the designer of the game. And so in the beginning of the game, when they were putting on their stuff, you didn't know if they put on the stuff and started the game or not. But somebody in the audience that was looking at the demonstration got up and said, down with Demonist Electra, and down, we want a reality, not the game world. And then he tries to shoot. Yes. So what I'm saying is that, don't you see the correlation of Cynthia being on, and she's going, well, there's the spectrum of classical logic is very, very narrow compared to the larger spectrum of things.
I also remember that the way it happened was that the guy had a plastic gun. He had a gun that went through the metal detector because it was a 3D printed gun. That was such.
Yeah, that's right.
So 12 Monkey. Oh my gosh.
Unraveling movie right before your eyes.
Well, you've now seen that movie in our minds. I'm sorry, but so.
but what I'm saying is the deeper metaphor of this was so beautiful, because they're fighting to try to kill her in her own game that she actually made, but everybody thinks it's real, and some people are trying to save her because they're saying, no, she's the goddess of ultra realities, while other people are going, she's a demon, and she's going to destroy this reality. We want this only reality where everything's just real. Do you understand? We want real, remember? And they were really, really emphatic about it. So I mean, I was just, oh my gosh.
Also that aspect was supposedly programmed into the game. It wasn't even supposed to be real, but it was real. But it was the most realistic and believable thing that happened, so that the game could be believable. And then afterwards, they're like, oh, that was just a game, and everybody goes back to being friends after the game's over, and people died. It killed themselves.
Exactly, but you forgot one thing, Andreas. At the end of the game, when everybody's going, wow, that was the coolest game I've never experienced, people were having people were having psychological catharsis and everything, and they were freaking out going, it's the most amazing thing. I can't believe I had the strength to get through that and all that. And then all of a sudden everybody's pulling out of the church, and Carmen, the lady that wrote the game, and her friend, who is Jude Law, walk up to the guy that has the dog that was in the restaurant and says, and points guns at him and say that they want to shoot him because he is the demon that wants to make everybody stay in one reality.
And then everybody's super happy though that they're so happy that they've done this to each other. They're like, the woman saying after she murdered her husband in the game, or her boyfriend.
Oh yeah.
She's like, yeah. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but she's like, I duck gestalted the heck out of that.
Yeah. That's really weird.
Therapy. The video, and people do that now. They fight in games. They like lovers and couples, like married couples that play video games this era, and they're playing first person shooters against each other, and it's a relieving thing. I think especially when I have a friend who's a woman who plays those kinds of games because it makes her feel strong, but also she's a broken back. So she's unable to do all sorts of other things, and so she's met all sorts of people through this augmented reality world. She loved EverQuest and all these. I can't even remember the names of all these games where you ride around on a horse, and it's like a very like Lord of the Rings world, and they meet people and they talk, and then they go off on quests together. And MMOs, yeah. There's all kinds of cool MMOs.
Are you serious? There's MMOs where people are actually coming together as couples, and do they play?
Absolutely. Well, there used to be for a long time. There was Sims, and there was Second Life.
I know about the Sims, but I'm saying that actual people can now, like Second Life, which I've played a long time ago, where people come in.
Definitely that. Where people come together, is that what you mean? Well, so okay, imagine that Second Life was where people met online and then they had relationships exclusively online. I mean, there's some people who actually met through Second Life. You gotta understand.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The guy who invented eBay, he only does meetings through Second Life. Even to this day, you have to go to his special island, and you have to have your own. And so people pay people to make archaic Second Life systems so they can go talk to him.
Okay, well, dude, I had my own island, and I haven't gone back in a while, so I better go back.
Yeah. Do you think that there's a value to these augmented realities? And do you think that those realities make it possible for us to experience something that is, healthy? Like,
Well, they give us an easy way to create things quickly that would take it would take a lot more of our interconnected beingness otherwise. So it's kind of a great sandbox tool, but I think there's a danger implicit in that very world, because I haven't seen that movie Existence, but I think it points out, I'm not sure what the point of the movie was, but at one point that it seems like it's making is that you can easily get so drawn into those worlds that they can start seeming realer than real life. And I think we've seen other movies like that too recently. So I think that is a real danger. Better to learn how to do the kinds of shiftings of reality that we are witnessing with synchronicity, with witnessing old things come back to life that you're looking for, that sort of thing. Finding real connections as much as you can. I think that's a good thing. I think there's a place for these virtual worlds, but the trouble is if they start replacing the real life that in our real life experiences, I think that's a slippery slope, and I think humans can get lost pretty easily. Yeah, well, I'm trying to think. This has been a rich conversation, and we've touched on lots of things lightly, but one of the things that I think is so important, especially for this group, to keep in mind is when you're thinking about various possibilities and recognizing that temptation, that some people have the wrong idea, just stay focused on what you're doing, whatever that may be, and the merits of that will show themselves. And so I think that there's going to be more open-mindedness, more respectfulness as we move toward the future, because there needs to be. And I think the biggest idea of all is this one of expanded awareness, this meta-awareness of each of ourselves, that maybe we get that through the simulation game experience, maybe we get it through a hobby, whatever, maybe it's through meditation. But as we expand our ability to see ourselves as bigger than just a smaller version of ourselves, we become bigger players in the world. You will start eventually seeing that your thoughts are instantly shaping reality, especially as you're more finely attuned to what you consider to be good, because then you're in alignment with yourself, because then what you need for yourself is what you need for everyone. And of course, you're going to see those things come true pretty fast.
That was beautiful. I hope that we can talk more soon. I hope that everyone can check out.
Yes, the website is RealityShifters.com, and you can sign up for the newsletter, which I send out once a month, so you don't get spammed. I don't sell the list. Unsubscribe if you want to. And it's also the way to connect easily to the YouTube channel or Facebook or whatever else is going on at the time, and the podcast and the books and the meditation CD. So everything can be found right through RealityShifters.com.
Where is this airing right now?
Recent
This
talk
program is coming to you via Relay 2 satellite, a spacecraft orbiting the Earth at a speed of over 17,000 miles per hour.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Targaryen.
Recent Targaryen.
Exertus.